an encouragement to not talk about it and embrace stoicism over, just talking about it, really.
And those are the 2 points of view. We were talking actually also about the decline in neighbourliness and the damage this does to our mental health. Kate says, I live in central Auckland. I put 58 invites in letterboxes for drinks one Friday night. I do it every year, and people come from age 30 to 90, various ethnic groups and occupations. We all love our neighbourhood, but all live quite separately. And when things go wrong, there are many friendly doors to knock on. That's great, isn't it?
One of those, that's lovely. And one of those statistics from the Our World in Data was that sources of unhappiness, you would think, would be poverty across the globe. It's actually mental health. As the higher one. So that's, you think just because you live in a poor country doesn't mean you're going to actually not suffer from mental illnesses. In fact, you're more likely to.
Jamie Oliver wants sales of energy drinks banned if you're under 16. He says caffeinated beverages carry a host of health risks for kids and teens, and they use them to get a legal high. Now, that sets the scene, but a joint Otago-Auckland University study out today using cameras, quite a different sort of study, reckons New Zealand children are exposed to 27 unhealthy food ads a day. Most common were ads for sugary drinks. Littering children's lives, these junk food ads, says Professor Louise Signal from Otago University. Do you agree with this conclusion that our children live in an obesogenic world and obesity is promoted as a normal response to their everyday environment? Is that right, or is it just old-fashioned enticement, admittedly on steroids? What do you think? Does it worry you, all the surrounding bombardments?
Yes, but I also, food police annoy me too. And I think that if you really want to do something about healthy eating, rather than banning stuff, make the healthy food cheaper. And there was another report out from Otago that when they lowered the price of milk, then more people bought milk than sugary drinks because it was cheaper. I mean, people make quite rational decisions. They're not stupid. And there's sometimes the food police approach just makes people sound like they're being a bit stupid rather than that they just haven't got enough money to buy certain kinds of food. You're a better person if you eat kale.
Yeah.
Not true.
Well, milk is free in schools, many schools at the moment, so... But of course, when we used to get it, by the time it got to lunchtime,
it was warm.
Yeah, that's right. I remember the warm milk.
Curdled and that sort of thing.
You got an opinion about Jamie Oliver and shielding our young people?
I'm in the food police category here. Yeah,
you are.
You are a food policeman?
No.
Oh, you agree with Josie?
Good to be important. Good to be clear about that, Neville.
I mean, there's a lot of issues surrounding this, and taxing it and banning it and restricting it generally doesn't solve the problem.
All right, last question today. Renters United in New Zealand arguing we should do the same as the Australian state of Victoria, allow tenants to have pets. And it is certainly hard to find a place to live if you have a cat or a dog. What do you think?
Yes, let people have pets. And to me, this is all about shifting from a culture where we buy houses, none of us can afford them anymore, to when we have lifelong renting or long-term renting. And so you need to have better quality of life in your rental property and protections. So yes, let people have their cats and dogs and snakes and spiders and
soft drinks and whatever else.
Mice and hamsters.
And Neville's agreeing with that as well.
As many soft drinks as they want.
A unanimity of opinion on the panel today on many important issues. And that was a surprise. Neville Gibson, thank you for coming in.
Pleasure as always, Jim.
And Josie Pagani, thanks for your company.
Thank you, guys. Lovely.
Thanks, everybody. We are back tomorrow. That's the panel. Now, Checkpoints with John Campbell.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight, police reveal the teenager who was killed in a police pursuit this morning was also a passenger in a car involved in a police chase down the wrong side of Auckland's southern motorway last month. Meanwhile, the police themselves come under fire for sending a tweet from the official police Twitter account saying, "This is the worst," alongside an image of Steve Carell in The Office with the caption, "When we have to tell someone their family member has died in a crash." Also tonight, the latest from Parliament is Winston Peters undertakes coalition talks with National and Labour, and a world first study. The panel just talking about it. We actually have the lead researcher. How much junk advertising do our children see?
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batanaho. Winston Peters has been in back-to-back meetings on forming a government since 9:30 this morning. The New Zealand First Leader and his team met first with National. An hour later they were in talks with Labour, and now, late this afternoon, they've resumed negotiations with National. Here's our political reporter May Heron.
Mr Peters says policies have been the focus of the negotiations. He has remained relatively tight-lipped about the details, but did reveal this morning that foreign ownership would be a part of the talks. Labour and Greens also met this morning, but Mr Peters says those talks weren't discussed during his meeting with Labour. Mr Peters today reiterated he would not have any direct meetings with the Green Party. New Zealand First and Labour will meet again tomorrow. From Parliament, May Heron.
The 15-year-old driver of a stolen car killed during a police chase today was also a passenger in a stolen car that drove down the wrong side of a motorway last month. Morocco Tai died early this morning when the car he was driving hit a tree in Otara. Eva Corlett reports.
The police say the car crashed within 52 seconds of the pursuit beginning. They say Morocco Tai died at the scene and two 16-year-old female passengers were taken to hospital, one with serious injuries and the other with moderate injuries. Inspector Dave Simpson says the Otara teenager was arrested last month after being a passenger in a car that was driven at speed along the wrong side of the southern motorway. He was later charged with aggravated robbery, endangering transport and aiding a driver in a dangerous matter. Ko Eva Corlett, Tēnei.
A crash that killed 3 people in Southland last night appears to have been a head-on collision. A 28-year-old man and 2 women, aged 28 and 22, died when 2 cars collided on the Dipton-Winton highway at about 10 o'clock. 2 children pulled from one of the wrecked cars are in Southland Hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. Senior Sergeant John Bissett says the cars appear to have collided head-on, but the police investigation is still in its early stages. The police have apologised for posting what they say was a wrong and insensitive tweet. The tweet headed with the words, "When we have to tell someone that their family member has died in a crash," shows the American comedian Steve Carell smiling and saying, "This is the worst." The post was deleted when its inappropriateness was pointed out to the police, but the Twitter response had already been swift, with one user describing the tweet as tone deaf and social media fail of the week. Earlier today, the police spoke out about what they called the tragedy of the rising road toll, saying more must be done to bring it down. The American Vice President is being accused of staging a publicity stunt by walking out of a National Football League match. Mike Pence turned up at the game between the San Francisco 49ers and the Indiana Colts, but walked out when about 20 players knelt during the national anthem as part of ongoing protests against racial injustice. He tweeted that he wouldn't dignify an event at which such disrespect was displayed. One of the 49ers, Eric Reid, believes it was a calculated move.
I would like to believe that he's such a busy man that he hasn't had time to hear our message, but this has been going on for over a year now, so I know that's not the case. Until he can prove that he's been an avid Colts fan and he comes to NFL games on a regular basis, this is a PR play.
Eric Reid. President Donald Trump says he's proud of what Mr Pence did. Hundreds of people have turned out to welcome the America's Cup to Edgecumbe 6 months after the Bay of Plenty town was hard hit by flooding. A wall of water from the Rangataiki River in April damaged more than 300 homes and the town's 1,600 residents had to flee. The chief executive of the Eastern Bay Chamber of Commerce, Jared Casey, says ironically today's event had to be moved to the town's Memorial Hall because of heavy rain. He says the hall was packed with locals.
They've gone through hard times, they're still continuing through hard times, and how do we keep them motivated? So this for them was a real shot on the arm.
Jared Casey says several America's Cup team members were taken to see the damage caused by the flood. It's 5:04. Sport, and the All Blacks coach Steve Hansen is hoping his decision to send Sam Whitelock, Liam Squire, Sam Cane, Lima Sopoaga and Ryan Crotty directly to Cape Town for yesterday's game against South Africa pays off down the road. All 5 players took part in the 25-24 triumph, having been rested for the 36-10 away win over Argentina a week earlier. Stephen Hewson reports.
Steve Hansen felt the 5 players weren't at their best against the Springboks on Sunday morning, but he's hopeful spelling them will prove a wise decision longer term. The side's barely midway through a gruelling travel schedule, with their third Bledisloe Cup test in Brisbane still to come in a fortnight. They'll then head to Europe with tests against France, Scotland and Wales. Hansen's confirmed that he'll take 37 players on that tour, but he won't be selecting an apprentice player as he has done in previous years. Both loose forward Adi Savia and fullback Geordie Barrett travelled with the All Blacks in a non-playing capacity before graduating to the test side. This is Stephen Hewson.
The Argentina football team are keeping media silence before their most vital World Cup qualifier in years. They've flown to Ecuador needing a win in their final South American group qualifying match to keep their cup dream alive. Argentina have only ever won one World Cup qualifier at the high-altitude Ecuador capital of Quito. And the New Zealand squash player Paul Cole has claimed one of the biggest scalps of his career, beating top seed and world number 2 Kareem Abdul-Gawad in the first round of the US Open in Philadelphia. That's the news.
University numbers are down.
It allows graduates to go into stable work as opposed to sort of patchy work. So actually there's a public value of tertiary education there as well.
Voting numbers are up.
We really had a strong push around enrolling and voting, and people took us up on those offers too.
And the numbers still unclear in the capital.
With different political parties, we campaigned on different views on a whole range of things, and some of those will be contested in the negotiations, but probably not all of them.
Our numbers are growing. Join us, Guy Espiner and Susie Ferguson. Morning Report weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, projections for New Zealand's changing ethnic makeup and how companies are planning for even more diversity. And after 10, China's acclaimed yet insular education system from a parent's perspective. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel in the central high country. Showers frequent today and tomorrow afternoon, some heavy and possibly thundery with hail today. Bay of Plenty rain with heavy falls east of Rotorua and a few showers elsewhere, some heavy and possibly thundery with hail. Tomorrow, isolated showers frequent during the afternoon. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, periods of rain today, heavy about the ranges. Showers tomorrow afternoon, some heavy with isolated thunderstorms. Horowhenua, Kapiti and Wellington, occasional showers. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, rain easing today and clearing tomorrow morning. Scattered showers tomorrow afternoon. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, scattered showers mainly this afternoon, rain developing tomorrow. Otago and Southland mainly fine but patchy drizzle about coastal Otago today and isolated showers about the ranges this afternoon. Showers developing everywhere tomorrow afternoon, possibly heavy, and the Chatham Islands cloudy periods with rain tomorrow afternoon. It's just gone 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina, and welcome everyone. Nice to have you with us. Coming up on the programme tonight, coalition negotiations, our parliamentary team reports the workload pressure on doctors and nurses versus the pressure on DHBs to find even more efficiencies. How much junk food advertising and marketing are our children subjected to? And a police tweet that really did get it very wrong, and that's the police saying that. But first tonight, police say the teenage driver of a stolen car who crashed and died during a pursuit this morning was also a passenger in a stolen car that drove down the wrong side of Auckland's southern motorway last month. Morocco Tai died on Otara's Beards Road this morning after his car collided with a tree less than a minute after police began the chase. 2 15-year-old women in the car were also injured, one seriously. Eva Corlett reports.
Yellow spray paint and dotted lines mark the arc of the wheels skidding across the bend on Beards Road. They pass through the centre line and opposite lane and end at the foot of a tree. The tree, around 1 metre in girth, is snapped and splintered across parts of the virgin footpath following the impact of the stolen car driven by 15-year-old Morocco Tai. The bonnet of the blue sedan had been wrapped around the trunk. Inspector Dave Simpson says the police chase lasted just 52 seconds before Morocco Tai crashed. Just over 2 weeks ago, Morocco had been a passenger in another stolen car that was driven at speed down the wrong side of the motorway.
Literally hundreds of members of the public had their lives affected that day when that car was out of control. So, yeah, it's a difficult situation. What young people see as joyriding today's events show there can be tragic outcomes.
Mr Simpson was asked how Morocco was able to be behind the wheel of a second stolen car so soon.
That's something I'm really unable to comment on. Police did their job when we apprehended him. After that, it's not our issue.
Initially, Mr Simpson said Morocco had been the driver during last month's incident, but later clarified that he had been a passenger. He said Morocco was charged with aggravated robbery, endangering transport and aiding a driver in a dangerous matter. Youth offenders are routinely referred to oranga tamariki. It is not known if Morocco was too. The ministry, formerly known as Child, Youth and Family, did not respond before deadline. The mood on Beards Road was sombre this afternoon. One night shift worker who lives across the street had just finished his shift.
I got back from work, I was just about to go to bed, and then I heard this whole lot of sirens coming through, and I think it might have been a car chase, kind of sounded like it. And then I just heard this whooshing sound, like the car was skidding down the road or something, and then it hit the tree.
A teacher at a nearby early childhood centre says police warned staff to keep children away.
When we got here, I think the body was still inside the car, and they were it was advised by the police, to keep the children away because, the scene is too dramatic for everyone to see.
Beards Road is a major arterial road that runs through Otara, connecting Otahuhu to Clover Park. At the northern end, it's mostly industrial, with some shopping precincts which become more residential as you travel south. It's a 60-kilometre zone where the car crashed, but residents say drivers zip through the streets at up to 100 kilometres per hour. The night shift worker says he and many of his neighbours have suffered damage to their property.
It's a very dangerous corner, and even when we're in bed we can just hear cars just whizzing by like they were doing about 100 miles an hour on the road or something. Just recently as well, there was another house just as you go around the bend, car ploughed through their fence right up into their shed and just smashed everything.
Another resident who has lived on the corner for 55 years pointed out some damage.
They have a lot of accidents over here. Hit that post, 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 hit every post. Hit that house, I don't know how many times that fence getting hit all the time. So he went straight to that fence, straight to the other one.
He says this crash is the worst one yet. The Independent Police Conduct Authority is now investigating. I Otara mo te hōtaka o te iahiahi, ko Eva Corlett, tēnei.
Meanwhile, just 20 minutes after the media conference about Morocco Tai and the chase started, a tweet went out from the official New Zealand Police Twitter account. It was a meme, an image of Steve Carell from the comedy series The Office, grinning in a pained kind of fashion and saying in that way his character speaks, "This is the worst." The caption alongside that image read, "When we have to tell someone their family member has died in a crash." Memes are almost exclusively created to make a joke of something. The comedic image of Steve Carell coupled with the caption provoked an immediate response from people on Twitter, stunned that anyone at the police thought it was appropriate. Zach Fleming took the tweet out on the streets of Auckland CBD a short time ago to ask people what they thought of it. The teenage boys you'll hear first of all lost a friend in a car crash on Boxing Day last year.
That's pretty sad, eh? It's pretty messed up. Yeah.
In what way?
I don't know. Oh, they just memed someone's death.
Yeah.
That's pretty
So if that was your brother and you saw this tweet, how'd you feel?
pretty off today. I'd be really angry. That was the New Zealand police who did that.
Yeah, the New Zealand police.
Page did that.
Yeah, so this is a real tweet.
Far out. Pretty deep.
It's just in bad taste, really, isn't it?
No, it's offensive.
So who was that going to? To the family?
To the public. So this is a public tweet from the official police account.
Okay. That's stupid, bro. No one would like that being sent to them at all. Especially because I'm a father myself, I got two. And if that happened to me, I would try to hunt that person down. But that's just my point of view.
Yeah. This is not okay from the police account? Is it okay from anyone's account? Is this funny for anyone to joke about?
That's not funny at all. That's just stupid, bro.
They've deleted it and said sorry, but is that good enough?
It's too late. The damage has been done.
Is it funny to joke about a kid dying in a car crash?
No, not at all.
Is this okay for the police to send out as a public tweet?
Nah.
No, that's awful. Yeah.
Why is it awful?
Because it's making fun of a really sad situation for a family who's had a member die in a car crash.
How would you feel if this was, maybe your son or your father or?
Yeah, I'd be quite upset, for sure.
The police have since apologised and deleted the tweet. In fact, they did so almost immediately. The Deputy Chief Executive of Police Public Affairs is Karen Jones. I spoke to her shortly before we came on air.
Something really, really wrong. You know, we post hundreds of comments on social media every day, and in this case, we got it wrong. You know, with the right intent, they were trying to obviously raise the very important topic of road safety, but the tone was wrong, the imagery was wrong, and all we can do is apologise.
Right, so this was actually willful. This wasn't a mistake. Somebody actually put this out thinking it was a good idea.
Yes, obviously in hindsight, and within 2 minutes they took it down. They just got the imagery wrong. They thought, I'll talk about the issue of, you know, what is literally the worst part of the job is telling families that loved ones have died. They just,
and they thought they would use a photo of Steve Carell from The Office grinning like an idiot.
As we said, all we can do is apologise. The imagery was completely wrong. It was only up for 2 minutes. We quickly got feedback from our community that we had completely used the wrong tone, the wrong imagery, and it was very insensitive, and we quickly took it down and we issued an apology tweet saying, you know what, we completely got that wrong, it was insensitive, and we will learn from this.
It strikes me as such spectacularly bad judgment, doesn't it? I mean, do you have to learn from this? Shouldn't you have known in advance that using a GIF from The Office, which is a black comedy, of a man grinning and saying underneath, "This is the worst," as he speaks about telling someone their family member has died in a crash. I mean, really, anyone who was even remotely sentient would know that was a bad call, wouldn't they?
As I've said, all I can say is, yep, we're really sorry. It was completely the wrong imagery to use, and you know, we got it wrong, and we've, you know, obviously there's well-meaning people behind us who are absolutely distraught because they come to work to try and, you know, raise these kinds of issues in a sensitive way, and it was a wrong call.
Have you ever knocked on a door? Are you sworn or are you comms?
No, I'm not constabulary, but obviously I work closely with many hard-working, you know, members of police staff that do that, and they have told me it's the hardest thing to do. Yeah.
Well, go and knock on a door, and the door is opened by somebody, and you have to tell that human face, "I'm so sorry, but your son or daughter or husband or wife or has been killed," and it's always still done by a door knock, isn't it? Wherever possible.
Wherever possible, yes.
So, in a way, not only is this awful for the victims, but it's also awful for the people who have to do that really tough work.
Yeah, and that is why, you know, members of my team are, you know, absolutely upset about this because it undermines all the work they do to try and support our officers on the front line and get those important road safety and crash messages out there, because it is, you're right, it's completely, it demeans their work, and we completely accept that. I mean, all I can do is apologise on behalf of New Zealand Police that, you know, we put out something that was so insensitive.
It also speaks, doesn't it, to the fact the road toll is up, and the fact that after trending down for a few years, it's risen quite dramatically this year, and the messages aren't getting through. Tragic cases of children in Auckland driving on the wrong side of the road. And you have to connect with people and get this message across, but this simply isn't the way to do it, is it?
No, and as I think I mentioned, the intent was to try and use our social media platforms to try and connect with audiences in a different way. And this time we got it completely wrong. Absolutely. Hand on heart, we are gutted.
It's Karen Jones, who is Deputy Chief Executive of Public Affairs at New Zealand Police. Let's head to Parliament now. Winston Peters has revealed that foreign ownership is playing a part in his coalition negotiations with Labour and National as the shape of the talks begins to emerge. The New Zealand First Leader and his team met with both National and Labour again today at Parliament, with Labour and the Greens also holding separate talks this morning. But leaders of all the parties involved are remaining pretty tight-lipped about any details of what's been discussed. Here's our political reporter, May Heron.
The meeting room for the talks is in an unassuming windowless room on the second floor of the Beehive. It's neutral territory for all parties and out of reach for the media. First up this morning, National headed into talks with New Zealand First. After just over 2 hours, the two parties emerged. New Zealand First leader Winston Peters told reporters the meeting was great, like every meeting has been so far.
These talks are about a change in the way this country is run, both economically and socially. That's what I mean by that.
So without wanting to breach the confidentiality of the talks, are you asking both parties to maybe adopt the policies that you think will best make that change, best support New Zealand?
Well, how can I possibly answer that question?
Well, there's foreign ownership.
These are confidential conversations and discussions.
There's foreign ownership a large part of these talks, and in terms of the IO and shaking them up.
Well, I don't think there's anybody in the press gallery that would not think foreign ownership is not part of these talks.
While National and New Zealand First were ensconced in their meeting, Labour was holding its second round of talks with the Greens. As he emerged from Labour's offices in Parliament House, Greens leader James Shaw told media that the talks were warm and constructive.
We're talking about all sorts of things.
Including policy concessions?
We're talking about what it takes to form a government.
Ministerial roles, deputy prime
everything
minister?
Everything that involves putting together a government. So it's broad-ranging, covers all the bases. And it's going very well.
Not long after that meeting, Labour's leader Jacinda Ardern led her negotiating team into the Beehive Room for their meetings with New Zealand First. It was the same team as yesterday, apart from the addition of the senior Labour MP David Parker, the party's spokesperson on water and the environment. The meeting between the two parties went for half an hour longer than National's meeting, and Miss Ardern made a brief statement to the media when they emerged.
All right. How did those talks go?
I'd say that was another really positive session again today with New Zealand First. That builds on the positive and really constructive session yesterday. We now are in a position where we're discussing quite a bit of policy detail, which moves us further along in these negotiations. Labour, of course, working at the same time with the Green Party in negotiations. That will continue tomorrow as well. We're using the time in between to make sure that we're prepared for each period of negotiation as it comes. But in conclusion, positive, and we continue to move forward.
As he returned to his Bowen House office for a break between talks, Winston Peters told media that the talks are completely focused on policy. He was quizzed on whether the addition of David Parker to Labour's team meant they were discussing environmental policy and water taxes.
You know that this is strictly confidential and that I can't possibly tell you.
Well, you know that I ask questions.
Yeah, I know, but you know that you're asking questions in an environment where I can't possibly answer. Are you trying to make me embarrassed or what?
No, not at all. It'd be the last thing I want to do.
Thank you very much.
How would you compare these negotiations? You've been now in this position twice.
Well, this is the third time.
Yeah, you've been in twice before.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah. It's before you missed out. The reality is dissimilar in some ways because of circumstances. More like 1996 and 2005, but we don't know, we've got a few days to go yet before we'll know the outcome.
New Zealand First is now in its second meeting with National's negotiating team, although it made a change to its own team, subbing out Tracy Martin and including Shane Jones for the first time. New Zealand First will meet Labour tomorrow morning as the talks continue, with Winston Peters still adamant he will have his decision made by Thursday. From Parliament for Checkpoint, May Heron.
5:23. You are with Checkpoint on RNZ. Since the end of July, Checkpoint has looked in depth at the financial pressures on many of the country's DHBs, Southern, Canterbury, Northland, Waikato, counties, Manukau and more. Throughout that time, we've used our own sources, internal documents leaked to us, staff members at the DHB, even ministry sources in Wellington. But tonight we talk to the head of the Association of Salaried Medical Specialists, Ian Powell. And as you'll hear, he tells us that in all his time at the ASMS, he's never seen people on the ground in health, including the doctors he represents, under such pressure due to their workloads, whilst DHB bosses are under pressure to cut deficits by finding more efficiencies. We'll have more on that soon. But first, last month, Checkpoint obtained a survey by the New Zealand Nurses Organisation, which showed 267 of 272 surveyed nurses at the county's Manukau DHB answered yes to a question about whether they've experienced short staffing. Well, today Ian Powell told us the ASMS had surveyed clinical leaders, and what did they find?
Well, what it tells us is that they are overstretched, under-resourced, burnt out. We know from earlier research we've done but in August last year that 50% of specialists in our public hospitals are burnt out. And it varies a bit from district health board to district health board, but not markedly. So there's a very high burnout rate at counties, and this shows the obvious that burnout is primarily due to being overworked. Now, your program has featured quite a lot on deficits of district health boards. There's a lot that can be said on that. But the point I would make in the context of this matter is that specialists are paying for that deficit with their health, with their personal health. And there is an abrogation of responsibility, both politically from government and generally from district health boards as a whole, to that fact. There's an abrogation of responsibility.
Ian, I want to come back to that, what you're calling an abrogation of responsibility. But first, you're telling us doctors are really up against it. Previously on Checkpoint, we've had a survey from nurses saying almost exactly the same thing, that they are really up against it, that they are stretched. But Checkpoint, and I am holding it now, has also obtained a document, we reported on it last month, which is a voluntary cessation scheme and offer of redundancy to staff, including clinicians. Now, their CEO, Dr. Gloria Johnson, says it's not voluntary redundancy, but it certainly offers people a way out. They can be paid to leave. At the same time as people working there are saying, hey, we're really up against it, we need more staff. Is that a paradox?
Well, it's worse than that. It's sheer bonkers. Look, I don't know where to start with that. It is absolutely absurd, and it shows how much that leadership and that under its current leadership regime is operating in a bubble, and they're not operating in the real clinical frontline world. It is absurd. Whether it's a redundancy or not, they are using the standard redundancy formula to calculate what the payment might be. But what that is doing is saying to the existing workforce, okay, you're working very hard, you're working long hours, our contribution is going to be to make it worse for you. But further, to do that at a time when that DHB needs to be recruiting more staff, even just to fill official vacancies, what sort of message is that giving to applicants who might want to consider working in the South Auckland area? A very negative message. So that's a consequence of poor leadership, pure and simple.
Is that a consequence of poor leadership, pure and simple, or of real financial pressures? The DHBs that we have spoken to, and in this case, Counties Manukau, their CEO, Dr. Gloria Johnson, told us they probably wouldn't be doing stuff like this if they didn't have to reduce their deficit. Clearly,
district health boards are underfunded. The best estimates we're aware of, and a conservative estimate, is that since 2010, about $1.5 billion in relative terms has been sucked out of the system.
Can you explain that to me?
Over that period of time.
So what does that mean?
Taking into account demographic growth and taking into account cost increases, using the index that the Ministry of Health has to measure these things. So not in real terms, because health funding always goes up, but relative to cost pressures, which is influenced in part by demographic growth, the funding has gone down. Or rather, the funding has gone down by an estimated $1.5 billion over the period of time since 2010.
So the kind of pressures that we have seen and you have been talking about as existing at Counties Manukau, are they in other DHBs? Well, we know they are. We've seen them in Southern, we've seen them in Canterbury, we've reported on them in Northland. We've heard from lots of DHBs saying to varying degrees they feel under pressure. Is that what you're hearing from your members?
We are very much. Just on the specific issue of the survey, we've conducted similar surveys in Hawke's Bay, Mid-Central, Capital Coast and Nelson Marlborough over a similar period of time. And the results are very, very similar. Variations are around the margins. But overwhelmingly we are finding that it is really very difficult to provide quality health care at the moment. People are feeling under immense strain. But there's a two-fold problem here, John. One is that we do have underfunding. There's no doubt about that. The second thing, though, is that we have a significant failure of leadership. We have an abrogation of responsibility from the Minister of Health. I might suggest might be renamed the Minister of Soundbites, and and amongst some district health boards themselves. So some make erratic decisions and they panic. And the county situation with the voluntary cessation is an example of that.
Ian, my sense is that they feel stuck between a rock and a hard place here. Deficits aren't welcome. The DHBs we've spoken to describe real pressure around their financial targets. So they're looking for efficiencies, but their staff are saying, hey, we can't be any more efficient than we already are. And that is a real tension. And DHB after DHB, we've been reporting on this stuff for 2 months now. And I know you've been doing this for a lot longer. Have you ever seen that kind of tension between shop floor and fiscal pressure as pronounced as it is now?
No, I've actually been thinking about that question for some time, because it's very easy to sort of feel like the most recent pressure is the worst ever. But when I think back to, for example, that we had a very bizarre business model experience in our health system in the 1990s. But even then, when there was some initial financial retrenchment, the government of the day did turn that round a bit by addressing funding, not in the best way, but in a better way. In this case, what I would say now is that you've got to take it as something that's really accumulated over a period of time, but particularly since 2010, and I think it is worse now, the way it's accumulated, and the failure to address the warning signs ever that I've experienced.
Ian Powell of the Association of Salaried Medical Specialists. 28.5 to 6, coming up on Checkpoint. A world-first study using automated wearable cameras and GPS units finds children in New Zealand are exposed to around 27 advertisements for unhealthy food a day. Could a village of $50,000 tiny houses with shared facilities help solve the housing crisis? Will be one response to it. And the Ranfurly Shield goes to church in Taranaki, plus Nona's back with business news. We'd love your feedback. Text us 2101, email us checkpoint@radionz.co.nz, and don't forget we are, of course, on Twitter and Facebook. But before anything else, Katrina has the 5:30 headlines.
Winston Peters has been in back-to-back meetings on forming a government since 9:30 this morning. The New Zealand First leader and his team met first with National. An hour later, they were in talks with Labour, and now, late this afternoon, they've resumed negotiations with National. The 15-year-old driver of a stolen car killed during a police chase was also a passenger in a stolen car that drove down the wrong side of an Auckland motorway last month. Morocco Thai died early this morning when the car he was driving hit a tree in Otara. And a crash that killed 3 people, a man and 2 women in Southland last night, appears to have been a head-on collision. 2 children pulled from one of the wrecked cars are in hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. The police have apologised for what they say was a wrong and insensitive tweet. The tweet headed with the words, "When we have to tell someone their family member has died in a crash," shows the American comedian Steve Carell smiling and saying, "This is the worst." Earlier today, the police spoke out on what they called the tragedy of the rising road toll. The US Vice President is being accused of staging a publicity stunt by walking out of a National Football League match. Mike Pence turned up at the game between the San Francisco 49ers and the Indiana Colts, but walked out when about 20 players knelt during the national anthem as part of protests against racial injustice. One of the 49ers, Eric Reed, says he believes the walkout was a calculated move. Hundreds of people have turned out in Edgecumbe to welcome the America's Cup 6 months after the Bay of Plenty town was hard hit by flooding. The town's Memorial Hall was packed with locals who say the visit has provided a much needed morale boost. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. Let's turn to business news now with Nona Peltier. Hi, Nona. Welcome back.
Thank you.
New Zealand Oil and Gas is recommending shareholders accept a partial takeover firm from OG Oil and Gas.
Yep.
Do you know what the OG stands for?
Oil and gas?
It's good. Oil and gas, oil and gas. What are they offering other than a really bad name?
Actually, I really don't know.
But, what are they offering? New Zealand Oil and Gas?
They're offering 78 cents a share. And so they upped their offer a little bit. And that was enough for the New Zealand Oil and Gas, that's New Zealand Oil and Gas, to recommend that shareholders look at that offer as a good one. And OG wants to invest into the company and help it, do some development, and thinks it's a good vehicle for opportunities here in the in the region. So
right.
yeah,
and
that's
so
why they're doing it.
So they get access to...
Yeah, and they had received another offer from an Australian-owned firm that has ties with Singapore called Zeta Energy, and they had offered 72 cents some time back for about just over 50%.
Right.
They just wanted to take control of the company and had no real plans
So what was
for it.
this 78 cents or
Yeah,
something?
yeah. So exactly, and the Zeta one that's just kind of fallen away. So there you go.
Kiwi dollar, what's it done today? No, I haven't actually caught up with it.
It's kind of been in the doldrums, I would say. It was weaker. You know, there was a lot of things happening globally, though, and that's with the yen and the US dollar, and there's bigger things afoot that saw the New Zealand dollar decline before the votes were finally counted on Saturday. So the Kiwi was already low when it closed in New York. It went a little bit lower this morning. It hit a 4-month low, 70.5 US cents, but it recovered just slightly back to where it was, where it finished last week. So, you know, the Kiwi definitely is under pressure in it. At the moment, it's at 70.7 US cents. That's quite low, but then you'd expect that with political uncertainty. That's what the market doesn't like that very much. So they've put a kind of a premium on uncertainty. And once that's settled, you know, who can say what will happen to the Kiwi? But at the moment, 70.7 US cents, 91 Australian and 54 pence. So again, that was very little change from where it was on Saturday before the votes were finally counted. Now, more interestingly, the New Zealand Top 50 Index has finally broken that big milestone hit. It finished at 80,010.
8,000.
Oh, sorry.
8,010.
Excuse me.
That's
what did I say? 80?
Well, it would have been a bit.
That would have been a big. That's a much bigger number. No, it didn't get there.
And that's the first time ever through 8, isn't it?
Yeah, it moved that way through the day, and that was quite a large move up 0.4%. I'm going to be careful how I use my numbers now after that last mistake. 33-point rise, yeah. So, but still, that's very high. However, the markets everywhere are high, and that's, you know, that's the way it is. So we've had some stories recently that said, can this continue? Yeah, maybe not. Meanwhile, it's certainly highly valued. There's no doubt about it. Yeah, and I guess that's about all I have to say.
Nona Peltier, thank you very much. The share market at record highs, the dollar a bit soft.
Maybe for now.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Nona. A world-first study using automated wearable cameras and GPS units has found children in New Zealand are exposed to around 27 advertisements, marketing hits for healthy food every day. This as childhood obesity levels rise and rise in New Zealand. The study's lead researcher was Associate Professor Louise Signal from the Department of Public Health at the University of Otago. Louise is based in Wellington. And what makes the study really meaningful is that they were able to see exactly the advertising and marketing the children were being exposed to. How?
We asked 168 children from the Wellington region to wear automated cameras for 4 days. And they were wonderful. They wore them Thursday, Friday, Saturday and Sunday, and from morning until night. And they wore them around their necks, and the cameras took an automatic photograph of the world that they live in. And they gave us permission to use those photographs and to analyse them for anything that we found of public health interest.
And so two school days and 2 weekend days. And right. So you were able to see absolutely what they were being exposed to. And what did you find?
We found that they see an enormous amount of junk food marketing every day, 27 junk food ads on average a day in their everyday environment, in the schools, in the streets, in the recreation centres and so on, also, of course, in their homes.
And of the 27, what were they most likely to be seeing ads for?
Sugary drinks, fast food, confectionery and snack food.
And so all the kinds of foods that, when eaten in excess, lead sometimes to the kind of chronic obesity issues and diabetes issues that we're starting to see really develop in the Western world, right?
That's right. And we've got a particularly difficult problem with childhood overweight and obesity in this country. A third of our children are overweight or obese, and we are third in the OECD for obesity. So we really do need to do something urgently about this. Third in the OECD? Yes. Is that childhood obesity? Gosh, I didn't know that. Okay. Yeah.
And do you, I mean, of course, I was going to say, do you think these ads are efficacious? If they didn't work, people wouldn't spend money on having ads, right? So the whole point of the ad is to get the kid to want a Coca-Cola or whatever. Yeah. So how important is it, do you think, that we control the kind of messages that children are getting? And is that possible in a democracy?
Yeah, I think it is definitely possible in a democracy. We do it for a lot of other things. And many countries around the world now have taken leadership on this issue. In New Zealand, we have a self-regulatory system where the advertising and food industry regulate the marketing, and clearly it is failing our children. And I think we must have government leadership on this issue. We must have a government regulatory system, and we see that in countries like Brazil, for example.
And so what do they do in Brazil?
They have a system that is government regulated, so that the rules are set by the government. They're a much higher bar, and if there are breaches, then there are consequences. Whereas in our system, that is not the case.
And I guess you would cite smoking and tobacco advertising as a precedent, right? When you and I were growing up, it was everywhere. Now, of course, you don't even see the packets on the shelves.
No, that's right.
Do you have to go that far?
Well, the obesity epidemic is a significant problem for us. It costs us $1 billion a year in health costs and lost productivity. That's $10 billion over the next 10 years. That's a huge sum that it's going to cost us. We aren't going to be able to afford the diabetes care that we're going to need if we continue in the way we are. So we do have to take some strong steps. I think it is a major issue for us. Non-communicable diseases such as diabetes, cancer and so on have exceeded tobacco now in terms of being the biggest problem globally. That's driven by food. So food now is the leading cause of NCDs globally, not tobacco. It's the worst offender. So in a sense, we really do have to act.
Louise Signal, just some clarification around that, because it's such a fascinating statistic. It is indeed the case that obesity has overtaken tobacco as the leading cause of health loss in New Zealand since 2016. Obesity, the leading cause. That's a report from the Ministry of Health. So not just food, but also our sedentary lifestyles, the whole package. Obesity is now ahead of tobacco. Louise Signal, the lead researcher on that report. Federal investigations in the United States have started returning thousands of personal items left behind by concert-goers in Las Vegas last week as they fled last week's mass shooting. 58 people were killed and more than 500 injured when gunman Stephen Paddock opened fire on a music festival from a high-rise hotel room. Handbags, cell phones and clothing were all left behind and have been part of the massive crime scene outside the Mandalay Bay resort. With more, here's Barney Porter from ABC.
So far, 7 truckloads of personal belongings have been collected from the Las Vegas festival ground that became a killing zone. They're now being returned to survivors and relatives of the victims at the Las Vegas Convention Centre, starting with a few first sections of the concert scene. John Steinbeck is the Deputy Chief of the Clark County Fire Department.
We're past the response portion of this horrible incident. This is all about recovery now. And we need to get that messaging out about recovery. It's going to be a very, very long process, but we want to work as hard and as focused as we can on it and help the people that are in need for recovering from this and heal together as a community.
58 people watching a country music festival that night were killed when the gunman opened fire from his 32nd floor suite of his hotel overlooking the site. Nearly 500 others were injured, some by gunfire and some trampled or otherwise hurt while running for cover. And after a week of intensive inquiries down so many paths, investigators say they're no closer to understanding what drove the gunman to carry out the deadliest mass shooting in modern US history. On the weekend, the US Vice President Mike Pence visited the city, stressing unity and offering solace.
Those we lost were taken before their time, but their names and their stories will forever be etched into the hearts of the American people.
Nearly 300 people came to Las Vegas City Hall to hear the Vice President. Earlier, they had walked more than 10 kilometres along 4 separate paths to the event amid tight security. Among them was Patricia David.
We're praying for healing, yes. Praying for healing for the victims, praying for their loved ones, the survivors, pray for the rescuers, the first rescuer that got on the scene. We're praying for all the nurses and all the doctors.
But for Terry Nordby, there was another motive to join the prayer march.
To show our support for common sense gun legislation in this country. After what happened here in Las Vegas last Sunday, we believe it's time to act. It's not time to be silent. Congress needs to do something to protect the citizens of this country. We've had enough. Enough is enough. We've had enough massacres in this country, and it's time for Congress to act.
And as America's perennial gun control debate ratchets up again, for the bereaved still coming to terms with the loss of loved ones in this latest shooting tragedy, there's yet another hurdle to overcome. As in the case of the Sandy Hook primary school shooting in 2012, in which 20 children and 6 adults were killed, conspiracy theorists have already begun to argue online the Las Vegas attack was also an elaborate hoax, again staged by the government to introduce strict gun control laws.
That's the ABC's Barney Porter reporting. Just gone 6:45. So far, all the noise in the Spanish region of Catalonia has been about independence. But earlier today, New Zealand time, was all about unity and sticking with Spain, not separating away. Hundreds of thousands of people marched through the streets of Barcelona in protest at the Catalan government's plan to declare independence following this month's referendum. The protesters put immense pressure on the Catalan president, who's due to address the regional parliament on Wednesday morning New Zealand time. He'd intended to declare independence early this week, but many Catalans believe it's time for mediation between the central and regional government. Once again, this report from the ABC.
These people call themselves the silent majority, but today they were making plenty of noise, waving flags and chanting pro-unity slogans. They're hoping to convince the Catalan president to step back from his promise to declare independence. Carolina Rodriguez drove 2 hours from Girona, one of the most pro-independence regions of Catalonia, to attend this rally.
Here I'm very proud to see all the flags, and I want to live here in peace, and I think together we are stronger.
I head up to the 5th floor of an apartment block that overlooks the march. Minu Izaguirre is on the balcony waving a Spanish flag. Her family has owned this flat for 100 years.
I am Catalan, and I love Catalonia, and I want to be part of my country, which is Spain.
So right now we're 5 floors up on this balcony, above a very massive crowd.
Yes.
How does that make you feel, seeing so many people march for unity today?
It feels that we can do something, and I hope that this will make the Spanish government realize that, or the Catalan government realize, more than the Spanish, that they have to dialogue.
Miriam Tay is the vice president of the Catalan Civil Society who have organised this march. She says those who boycotted the independence referendum because it was illegal are finally getting a voice.
We have been silenced because we have faith in our democracy and institutions, but sometimes they have to hear what we feel.
Now they're shouting out and they Puigdemont's in jail, is that right?
Yes, because he has been out of the law. And
do you think he should be in jail?
I think the judges have to make their work. So if he has been out of the law, he has to be punished, but the judgments have to decide.
Carles Puigdemont now needs to decide what he'll do next. He's due to address the Catalan Parliament on Tuesday evening. He had promised to declare independence early this week, but this show of solidarity with the Spanish state might lead him to change his mind.
Steve Canan, aided and abetted by tens of thousands of raucous Spaniards, reporting there from the Catalan Unity March in Barcelona. It's coming up to 11 minutes to 6. A South Island woman wants to help solve the housing crisis, or at least come up with a response to it, by setting up a village of tiny homes so families can own their home, because tiny homes are cheap, but share facilities like a laundry, which tiny homes can't fit in, a playground and vegetable gardens. Now, Anya O'Connor lives with her son and dog in a tiny home near Wanaka, where the average house price is now, wait for this, $1 million. She says creating a tiny house village would give families their own privacy because you have your own bedrooms and living rooms, but also an opportunity to be mortgage-free whilst owning your own home and sharing facilities with others like you. I spoke with Anya early this afternoon and asked her just how big her tiny house is.
The living space in it is 22 square metres. And that's because we have 2 sleeping lofts. So the normal size is 7.2 metres long and 2.4 metres wide.
And you live there with your son and your dog, right?
Yes, yes.
And how do the three of you, does it all work out in there?
Yes, it does. Yeah, sometimes you have to send someone outside or yourself, but we live in such an awesome area, so there's a lot of outdoor living anyway.
Yes, I live, my house is slightly bigger than that, and sometimes I have to send myself outside, so I don't think it's unique to tiny houses that you sometimes you just need a break. So what is your idea that other tiny houses that you all kind of get together?
Yes, we would love to. I mean, I have a group of people where we all talk about it all the time. We about living self-contained, but still being part of something bigger, just to save money for a start, but then also the other things that come with it. You share more. Not every household needs their own washing machine. If you would have a shared facility that could totally run on solar and with grey water reticulation, and then you just have your washing day like in the good old days when you did share stuff. And it's just about maybe downsizing and how easy it actually is. Most people actually think they can't do it, but once they see my setup, they actually think, hey, maybe it is something I could do.
And the other thing is that it is so ridiculously expensive to live anywhere near Wanaka now, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And it's just, I have a business here, so I can't really go anywhere else. But seriously, I have been thinking about maybe going to Invercargill, where you actually really for $200,000 you get a nice setup and you're done. So if you sell up something here and go down there, you're mortgage free, bingo. But it just doesn't work like that, and it doesn't work in a community like that. You can't end up in a community where people are struggling too much financially, because that makes everybody just cranky.
And so, what does it cost to buy a house in town? Just a normal kind of family home in Wanaka?
Oh, nothing under 500,000, 600,000, nothing.
Yeah, and so that's a lot of money, and those prices are going up and up and up at a rate of knots. And so, what does your tiny house cost?
$50,000.
So it's 10% of the cheapest home in Wanaka.
Pretty much, yes. I did not do much myself. I could have saved money maybe by doing things myself, but I believe, I do what I do and other people do what they do best. So I let a builder do the whole thing. And it turned out fabulous. I absolutely enjoy every day I wake up, and I think that was the best thing I did.
And do you have a mortgage?
No. No. I have lots of money left over to go traveling. So I'm from Germany originally, so I'm going there every 2 years anyway. And now it just feels easier to do because you don't have to spend it on housing. But even my power bill, I don't have power bill, obviously. I have solar panels. But my gas for the heating and the cooking was 1 9 kg gas bottle for the winter, which is like $35 a week in the worst months of the year. And now it's down to nothing.
What about land costs? Whose land are you on?
I am on a private person's piece of land, and it's hidden away in the trees, and I pay $100 a week, which I chose to pay. That's what it was worth to me. And he didn't actually know what he wanted for it. He just has this land sitting, but he is worried about the authorities, that the council or other people complaining to the council will tell him to move me, which is fine because I have a trailer. I can just move.
And so you have no mortgage, you got your dwelling for 50 grand, you pay $100 a week for the land it's on, and you're saying that economies of scale, if you all moved in together, if there were other people doing the same thing and you shared the facilities that you don't actually need to own, that this would be a very effective and a much cheaper way of living in an expensive community like Wanaka.
Yes, absolutely. It's always, it's not just the money side of things, it's also the whole downsizing, that you are actually realizing that you do not need to go to the warehouse every week and buy some new stuff that you don't actually need.
Anya O'Connor talking about her tiny house and her hopes to establish a community of them just outside Wanaka. In a break from tradition, the Ranfurly Shield has made an impromptu visit to church following Taranaki's dramatic come-from-behind win over Canterbury at the weekend. It really was one out of the box. Usually worse for wear following after-match celebrations. This time around, Taranaki's Fijian contingent made sure the trophy paid due respect for what was basically a miraculous turnaround in that game. Our Taranaki reporter Robin Martin has the story.
Shooting basketball hoops after an indoor training session today, Taranaki winger Seta Tamanavalu says the visit to the City of Refuge Church came out of the blue.
The Fijian boys decided to take the shield at our church last night, and yeah, it was pretty good. We surprised them; they didn't know we were coming with it. So we bring it. A lot of people were pretty happy, and some of them they haven't seen the shield before or your hand on it. So it's pretty good to take it around and give to the people and enjoy it and take a few photos and all that.
Tamanavalu says the Taranaki players are still shocked at the thousands of people who lined the streets to welcome the team home after the stunning 55-43 victory.
It was amazing, eh? Like I was telling a few boys, like I didn't expect the crowd. Like it shows how passionate, like the people how grateful they are for us to bring the shield back home. So it was amazing to see a lot of kids and the family. They're standing on the street waving on their flags. So.
Before the log of wood could make it to church, it had to be wrestled from the grasp of forwards coach Paul Tito, who played 100 times for Taranaki. For him, the Shield victory has special meaning.
Yeah, I've been getting right around today. It eluded me as a player for, I think we had 5 or 6 challenges and we got fairly close on a couple, and it was actually really nice to win it. Yeah, it was a really special moment.
Tito says the Shield has lost none of its allure to people in the provinces.
It's very unique in New Zealand sport, and I think the Shield still holds that real awe about it. So it's great to see so many people around town that are really buzzing, and it's bringing it's really good for our province.
The Taranaki side face their first challenge for the log of wood on Wednesday from Championship side and near neighbours Manawatu. Plenty of bucketheads are sure to make the trip to support the Turbos, but despite being forced to claw back a 31-7 deficit against Canterbury, Taranaki Bulls fans don't give the visitors much of a shot.
We've been in the same situation at least 3 other occasions where it was going to be the shortest tenure, and we've survived each one of them.
They won't lose on Wednesday. Don't worry about it. They won't lose on Wednesday. We know that. They ain't going to lose.
Great, they're going to win.
The feeling and the morale in the team at the moment that we got off them on Saturday is just so high. It's going to be a very hard challenge for Manawatu to come up and take it off.
I think it's exciting, but I don't actually know about the game on Wednesday. I hope we can keep it.
If the Turbos do get up and win the match, Taranaki would have the ignominy of holding the record for the shortest ever Shield tenure. And Paul Tito, for one, is not taking that likelihood lightly.
You know, I mean, it's a Shield challenge, you know. Manawatu are a quality outfit. They've played really well this year, and they're well coached by Jeremy Cotter. We've got a lot of respect for him, so, you know what I mean, we've got to go out and win it again.
The Taranaki Rugby Union says it had sold 2,000 tickets by midday today, and it's hoping for a significant boost on its average gate this season of about 5,000. And once the Shield is secure for the summer and pending results, the union is already planning for the Mitre 10 playoffs and another bumper payday. In Taranaki for Checkpoint Call, Robin Martin Tene.
I'm very sorry that you missed Katrina Batten screaming, "Go the Naki" at the top of her voice during that. You're Taranaki?
Yeah.
Born and raised?
Yeah. Well, till I was 9.
Right.
So I can support either Taranaki or Wellington because
Yeah.
they have basically the same colours.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that's why we moved from one place to another.
I was just thinking that through and thinking, if you didn't know much about rugby, you'd wonder what the hell was going on. Like, what is a bucket head? For reasons known only to themselves, although I'm sure one of our listeners will explain, people in Palmerston North who support the Manawatu team wear buckets on their heads when they're watching the game. It is a delightful thing, but I've no idea why they do it. Lots of feedback coming in, thank you. Some of the stuff we receive about Jonathan Coleman, we won't read out on air, but this from Andrew Dufresne: surely all DHBs in New Zealand would be mindful of the fate of the Southern DHB under the previous government, and previous to that, the fate of the Canterbury Regional Council. That must put one hell of an additional strain on management. Andrew is reacting to our interview with Ian Powell from the Association of Salaried Medical Specialists. And of course, what happened to the Southern DHB was that the board was sacked and a commissioner was put in there to work on reducing the deficit. Lots of people suggesting that Jonathan Coleman shouldn't come back as minister if the Nats do form the next government in association with New Zealand First. And lots of people are saying, hey, don't give the police a hard time. This person who is called The Public, yours The Public. Amazing name. John, please give it a rest. The police tried, and points should be awarded to the police for trying to connect with us on a difficult issue.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening, ko Katrina Batten aho. The police have admitted that an offensive tweet they were forced to take down undermined their own frontline officers. The tweet, headed with the words, "When we have to tell someone their family member has died in a crash," shows the American comedian Steve Carell saying with a smile, "This is the worst." Officers typically deliver the news of a family member's death in a car crash by personally visiting the family. A spokesperson, Karen Jones, says the tweet was supposed to raise the important topic of road safety, but she accepts they got it wrong.
The imagery was completely wrong. It was only up for 2 minutes. We quickly got feedback from our community that we had completely used the wrong tone, the wrong imagery, and it was very insensitive, and we quickly took it down and we issued an apology tweet saying, you know what, we completely got that wrong, it was insensitive, and we will learn from this.
Police spokesperson Karen Jones. A South African psychiatrist who murdered his wife in Dunedin has been deported back to South Africa. Colin Bowell was convicted in 2001 of poisoning his wife Annette sometime between November 1999 and January 2000 and sentenced to life in prison for a minimum of 13 years, later extended to 15 years on appeal by the Crown. In September, the parole board agreed to release Bowell in October on condition he immediately agreed to return to South Africa. Immigration New Zealand has confirmed he left New Zealand this morning. The number of Tongan and Samoan overstayers in New Zealand has halved since the year 2000. A Massey University report for Immigration New Zealand says the number has fallen from about 20,000 to just over 10,000. The university's Pro-Vice-Chancellor, Paul Spoonley, says that accounts for 2/3 of the fall in the total number of overstayers. He says reports that the highest percentage of overstayers are Tongan is incorrect.
It's quite a complicated picture, and it depends on visa approvals and denials. So there are a number of groups from various countries who overstay particular visa categories. It's not like a league table where Tongans are number one.
Paul Spoonley says initiatives such as the recognised seasonal employer scheme and new systems for monitoring visas are some of the reasons for the drop. The New Zealand First leader Winston Peters says his party talks with the Labour Party continue to be totally centred on policies. After talks with the National Party this morning, Mr Peters revealed that foreign ownership had been the subject of discussion. Labour and the Greens also met this morning, but Mr Peters says that meeting was not discussed during his meeting with Labour this afternoon. He says there have been a lot of meetings.
We have meetings before the meetings. We have meetings as a party after those meetings before the next one with the other party. So whatever they're doing, we're doing 3 times that.
The New Zealand First leader, Winston Peters. A woman who became pregnant after a failed sterilisation has had her bid for weekly ACC compensation thrown out by the Court of Appeal. The woman, named only as Ms J, had a sterilisation operation in 1998 but got pregnant in 2006. Sally Murphy reports.
ACC paid costs during Miss J's pregnancy but refused her claim for weekly loss of earnings and compensation for having to stay home to care for her child. Its decision was upheld in the District Court in 2007, but ACC accepted Miss J's renewed claim in 2012. It determined she was entitled to weekly compensation from May 2006 to July that year because she couldn't work due to her pregnancy. The woman's request for the decision to be reviewed was dismissed, but she appealed. A Court of Appeal decision released today dismissed Miss J's claim for weekly compensation. It says she has recovered from her pregnancy, is not injured and does not require rehabilitation. This is Sally Murphy.
The American film producer Harvey Weinstein has been fired by the film company he founded as he faces allegations of sexual harassment. The board of the Weinstein Company says new information had come to light about his conduct. Here's the BBC's Peter Bowes.
Last week, the New York Times newspaper reported that Harvey Weinstein had behaved inappropriately towards several women and that he'd reached settlements with at least 8 of them. Mr. Weinstein issued an apology acknowledging that his actions with colleagues had caused a lot of pain. He said he would take a leave of absence to learn about himself and conquer his demons. He later disputed the newspaper's report and vowed to take legal action. He's now been told by the board of the company he helped to found that he no longer has a job.
Peter Bowes reporting. It's 6:05. To sport, in the Wallabies wing, Reece Hodge feels his side have some good momentum that will help them in the third Bledisloe Cup test against the All Blacks next week. The All Blacks pipped Australia 35-29 in their last meeting in Dunedin. The Wallabies have since drawn twice with the Springboks and beaten Argentina twice, and Hodge says they're progressing well.
We've talked about not changing our preparation too much depending on the game. We want to keep it pretty consistent, but it's clear that we're going to have to step up and fix a few things, and also from the South African game if we're going to beat the All Blacks in Brisbane. So a few days off for the boys and get back into camp and really knuckle down and hopefully get that result in Brisbane.
The Wallabies wing, Reece Hodge. The National Rugby League will stage 4 double headers in 4 different cities in the first 10 rounds next season. 11 clubs will take part in the 8 matches as the league looks to address a 2% drop in regular season crowd numbers this year compared with last year. South Sydney will host the Warriors before Canterbury, and champions Melbourne clash win the first Saturday matches of the season in Perth on March the 10th. The West's Tigers will play the Storm, and the Warriors will host North Queensland at Mount Smart Stadium in round 5 on April the 7th. The New Zealand Olympic trampolinist Dylan Schmidt has won a silver medal at the World Cup in Spain. The 20-year-old finished less than half a point behind the winner, Dong Dong of China. It's his best result at a world event. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, gearing up for National Homeless Day, because it's night time when you really notice if you haven't got one. We have part 2 of our window on the world of maggots, an alternative source of protein for us humans. And our astronomer, Alan Gilmore, joins us with more stories from deep space, like the latest on gravitational waves and fast radio bursts, and why the Australians are looking for them. So join me, Brian Crump, from Afternoon News at 7 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel and the Central High Country. Showers frequent today and tomorrow afternoon, some heavy and possibly thundery with hail today. Bay of Plenty rain with heavy falls east of Rotorua and a few showers elsewhere, some heavy and possibly thundery with hail. Tomorrow, isolated showers frequent during the afternoon. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa, periods of rain today, heavy about the ranges. Showers tomorrow afternoon, some heavy with isolated thunderstorms. Horowhenua, Kapiti and Wellington, occasional showers. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, rain easing today and clearing tomorrow morning. Scattered showers tomorrow afternoon. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, scattered showers mainly this afternoon, rain developing tomorrow. Otago and Southland mainly fine but patchy drizzle about coastal Otago today and isolated showers about the ranges this afternoon. Showers developing everywhere tomorrow afternoon, possibly heavy, and the Chatham Islands cloudy periods with rain tomorrow afternoon. Take a brolly. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. The police say car chases are becoming all too common and it's putting lives at risk. 15-year-old Morocco Tai died on Otara's Beards Road this morning when the stolen car he was driving collided with a tree less than a minute after police began a chase. Two 15-year-old females in the car were also injured, one seriously. Just last month, Morocco was also a passenger in a stolen car that sped the wrong way down the southern motorway. And if you've seen the footage of that, it defies the odds in every way that they didn't hit an oncoming car. Police Inspector Dave Simpson spoke to media outside the Manukau police station today.
Fleeing driver incidents are incredibly dangerous. They're dangerous to the public, they're dangerous to the police, and as it has been shown today, they're very dangerous to those involved in them. An outcome likely today is the last thing police want to see. We now have a family who have lost a son, and our thoughts are with them during this process. These are also devastating for the officers involved. They are being supported with welfare by their colleagues. They are here to protect our community, and if someone is committing a crime out there, we are going to do something about it. We ask that people please just stop the police and do not put their own or anyone else's life at risk.
How did he get from effectively being apprehended to out stealing a car 2 weeks later?
That's something I'm really unable to comment on. Police did their job when we apprehended him. After that, it's not our issue. This is an all too common event, and it really has to stop. This sort of event affects the lives of so many people. The previous motorway incident, for instance, it's a good example. Literally hundreds of members of the public had their lives affected that day when that car was out of control. So, yeah, it's a difficult situation. What young people see as joyriding, today's events show there can be tragic outcomes.
Police Inspector Dave Simpson speaking to a media conference this afternoon. We are hoping, if we don't get the phone tone, to talk to former police officer Glenn Green, who set up There's a Better Way Foundation, which works with at-risk youth. Glenn, are you there?
Yes, I am, John. Nice to talk to you again.
Really nice to talk to you. It's been a while, but it's lovely to have you on Checkpoint with us, although I'm sorry it's in these circumstances. If we look at Morocco Tai, he was in a car that drove the wrong way on the southern motorway. The wrong way on the southern motorway. Just over 2 weeks ago. He's arrested, charged with some reasonably serious offences. 2 weeks later, he's involved in another police pursuit in a stolen car, and now he's dead. And I just wonder how the hell we weren't able to better protect that kid from himself.
Absolutely. Firstly, I'd just like to say that my condolences go out to the family and everybody involved in the incident. I think, John, if I'm being honest with you, it comes down to influence. Influence of the young people is massive, and also I really do believe that the key to stopping this negative movement in the communities also comes down to community policing. In the communities, I believe that, the strongest gang wins. And if it's a gang of negativity and they're strong, they win. If it's a gang of positivity, being the police and those who care for the community, they will win. And I really believe that the community policing aspect really more has to be invested in community police.
Because that's, sorry to interrupt, but that's really intensive policing, isn't it? I mean, it's almost one-on-one. It's almost a kind of paternalism and maternalism. It's almost babysitting, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. But if you look at a community policing approach, or even an advertising approach, you look at what these young people have access to on Facebook right now with their mobile phones. There's so much negativity. There's so much negative enticement. What about a positive campaign to be able to bring positivity, to educate young people about this? But not only that, to get their interest and involved in something more positive. And yes, it's a lot of work when it comes to community policing, but I've seen huge change around with the right community constable can affect a whole community, and that's just not for New Zealand. That's happened in London and the US and New York as well. So one constable can impact thousands of people if it's the right guy.
Glenn, I want to ask you two questions, and I'm going to tell you in advance what the second one is, because you work at-risk youth, and we all know that there have been some profound success stories attached to your work, so I want to come back to that. But first, a kid like Morocco, he's 15 years old, you can't even drive till you're 16. He's in a car going the wrong way down the southern motorway. 2 weeks later, he drives himself to death in a police chase. Yes. Where does that kind of terrible fatalism come from? Why has that child got such a scant regard for his own life, let alone anyone else's? Why isn't someone looking after Morocco? How does that happen?
Tough questions. I must say that in regards to police influence, police can only do so much.
I'm almost not talking about police. It's just, how does a 15-year-old end up that fatalistic? And I mean, that's the home, isn't it? What's going on? And a boy, you know, these are big discussions. So let's set Morocco aside. How do our children feel that they have so little to live for?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, it's down to positive and negative influences in young people's lives, but there is a new concern and a new trend on top of that, to be honest with you, that I'm seeing, and that is the cool aspect. Is it cool to be part of a gang? And this is the problem. Do the young people of New Zealand only see what's on TV with the movies or the influence, and do they want to be a part of that? Have they chosen that as something cool? And that's been a big concern now. They're too young to receive a patch from a gang, but there are other ways that these gangs are influencing the young people, to be honest with you, with T-shirts, with hats. You know, some of them have a pathway, they have status, they have money.
They're belonging. They belong to a group of people who are ostensibly interested in them, right? Even if it's a criminal interest.
Absolutely. The interest is just to be able to pull them into their network, and then their lives mean nothing to them.
Right.
And this is a problem.
So when you are presented with those kids, when you are presented with damaged, at-risk, fatalistic kids, teenagers, what do you do with them?
The first thing that we do is try and make a connection. And this is through sport. We've chosen street basketball to make a connection with the young people. Instead of coming in straight away with all the heavy stuff, you've got to get to know someone. You've got to get them to open up. And once they see the true integrity of you trying to help them as a person and not judge them, then there is a chance to open up, and it usually stems from there.
Are there lots of occasions where it's been a long time since anyone took a particular interest in the most damaged kids you see? Are they? Yeah.
It really is a tough one. I don't think there's any. We've had some successes, but we've also had some losses as well. And it does come back to the individual. But what makes it harder is that each individual is so different. Some of them have horrendous upbringings. Some of them have mental health issues, which again is a big problem. And, that tied together with repeat offending is actually really, really hard to fix. There has to be a breakthrough. There has to be an enlightenment period for these young people.
That's former police officer Glenn Green. Thank you, Glenn. Really nice to talk to you. Glenn set up There's a Better Way Foundation, which works with at-risk youth, talking about generally the situation that was represented in the very tragic particular by Morocco Ty, who died in that car crash this morning, having been involved in a police pursuit on the wrong side of the southern motorway just 2 weeks ago. Less than half the money set aside in a government fund to support businesses affected by the closure of State Highway 1 following the Kaikoura earthquake has been spent. The Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment says just under $400,000 of the $1 million available has been given to 18 businesses in the area, including 3 in the Hurunui district. This comes as quake-affected businesses call for more details around the reopening of the highway north of Kaikoura, which is expected before Christmas. Maya Bari, who's been doing really good work on this, reports.
This is all our wool and our samples and knitting patterns. What else have we got? Quilts, quilt displays.
Rachel Penny is showing me around her Kaikoura craft and souvenir store, A Patch of Country. She's lived in Kaikoura all her life and has been running the store for more than a decade. But Ms Penny's business has suffered since November's quake brought slips down onto State Highway 1 and forced the closure of the main tourist route between Picton and Christchurch.
Sales have probably gone down 70%, I would say, since the road's been closed. I mean, we do get a lot of locals, but we rely on the tourist trade in the summertime, which we didn't have. So we've had like 3 winters in a row.
In May, the government rolled out a $1 million business recovery grant program intended to offer financial assistance to affected businesses while the road is closed. Figures provided by the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment show 18 businesses in Kaikoura have received money, while 15, including Ms Penny, have had their applications declined. Ms Penny says trying to pay the bills and keep stock up has now become too difficult.
Well, I've made the decision to close after 12 years. We applied for the government subsidy but were refused, so yeah, I've had to pull the pin.
Ms Penny says her application was declined because last year her business ran at a loss, but she doesn't agree with the call.
No, I don't reckon it is fair because, I mean, you're supporting the locals by being here and, I mean, yeah, you may not have made any money that year, but, yeah, no, I think it should be broader than that.
MB's manager for enterprise and policy, Carl Woodhead, says to be eligible for the grant, businesses have to meet a range of criteria, including proving they were viable pre-quake. Mr Woodhead says $17 million has already been spent helping businesses through a different wage subsidy package. He says it isn't concerning that more than half of the money allocated to the Business Recovery Grant program remains unspent.
What I'm relying on is the assessment panel making a decision about whether the business should be receiving the funding based on the criteria that's been set.
One business that has benefited from the grant is Encounter Kaikoura, which runs boat tours for people to swim with dolphins and watch other wildlife. Its co-owner, Lynette Berman, says before the quake at least half of their customers came from through traffic from the highway, and the disaster had cost them millions of dollars. Ms Berman says she's worried that when State Highway 1 north of Kaikoura does reopen, there will still be on and off closures of the road due to repair work and adverse weather, which could confuse tourists.
We have a real concern about that. We're just trying to get some certainty around what we can expect because we invest heavily in our marketing efforts and the messaging we're putting out there is being challenged all the time.
The Transport Agency says it is on track to have the road reopened by Christmas, but it can't yet provide an exact date or say what access will be like. For Checkpoint, Maya Burry.
21 minutes past 6. Eyesight problems in children at low decile schools are in the spotlight, with new research showing 1 in 3 have vision problems that go unnoticed for years. New research from the charity Islaw Vision Foundation has found 30% of the 3,000 low decile school students it screened had a vision issue they weren't even aware of. Mass University researchers say this raises some big questions about how children's eyes are being tested. Are children's eyes being tested? Tom Furley reports.
Last year, the 180 Year 5 and 6 students at Decile 1 Rowandale School in Manurewa had free eye tests done by the Islaw Vision Foundation. 20 children needed glasses, and its principal, Carl Varso, says parents were moved to tears as their children were presented with some at a school assembly.
It's a tool that these kids need to succeed. I can't imagine myself if I couldn't do my job because I couldn't see. I can't imagine what it's like for a child who can't see the board or read properly or can't catch a ball because they can't see it coming towards them. Whereas now these 20 children that we got through last year, have had that barrier or that thing taken away.
Carl Varso says without glasses, some students found it hard to learn.
With a lot of these children, once they've fixed their eyes, away they go. It's like amazing. It's like a new world for them.
With glasses costing around $200 plus the additional costs of getting eye checks, it's hard for many to afford.
For our families, that amount of money for the little income that they do have takes a lot of planning. And there will be a lot of sacrifices that will be needed to be made to try and generate that much money for these kids.
Currently, the Ministry of Health funds free eye checks for children before they start school at age 5, and then again when they're in Year 7 at age 11 or 12. A researcher at Massey University, Alison Kearney, says a lot of children are going through the majority of their primary schooling without the glasses they need and without being checked again.
I think it raises questions about what's happening at the Before 5 health check and what sort of follow-up is there for those children who are identified at that check as requiring either further follow-up or corrective lenses. That's the number one question. And then the sorts of tests that we're using at the Before 5 health check too.
The researchers say the before-school vision checks look at things like lazy eyes and squinting, but don't screen for issues like short-sightedness. Ms Kearney says most of the issues are easily remedied by a pair of glasses.
One of the things that I think is that, if we can provide dental checks for children every year, and we can do that in schools, why can't we provide vision checks for children in schools, considering how important vision is for their learning?
Back at Rowandale School in Manurewa, Mr Vasso notes there are free dental checks and doctor's visits for children and believes vision checks should be added to the mix.
Something like this where you would get a free checkup possibly from an optometrist for a child, and then support with the glasses would be excellent. If that was something that was funded, amazing, because it just creates an opportunity for our kids to be on a level playing field.
The Ministry of Health says its vision screening program is in line with current evidence and best practice, and says there is little evidence to support more frequent screening after children start school. It also says there is little evidence that undetected vision problems are a significant cause of academic underperformance, and in fact says evidence suggests those with nearsightedness do better. In Auckland for Checkpoint, Tom Furley.
The American Vice President Mike Pence has walked out of a National Football League game after some players dropped a knee. Mr Pence turned up at the game between the San Francisco 49ers and the Indiana Colts in a last-minute change to his schedule. As part of ongoing protests against racial injustice, members of the 49ers knelt during the national anthem. That's all they did. But as the BBC's Andrew Plant reports, some believe Mr Pence's walkout as a result of the kneeling was a carefully staged political stunt. They had photos ready to go, they issued a media release, and President Donald Trump tweeted that he was proud of what his vice president had done.
It's called taking a knee. Sports stars refusing to stand during the national anthem. Among the fans at this NFL game, Vice President Mike Pence, who walked out of the stadium straight to the airport and on board a plane home. The Vice President tweeted he left the game because he wouldn't dignify an event, he said, that disrespects our soldiers, our flag or our national anthem. President Trump also tweeted that he had asked his vice president to leave the game if any players kneeled. It's a protest against racial injustice, started weeks ago in the NFL but taken up by athletes elsewhere. Last month, the basketball team missed out on a White House dinner after players criticised President Trump.
Lightning forward J.T. Brown with a fist in the air.
Gestures of protest becoming commonplace across major sporting fixtures. In September, President Trump had this to say.
Wouldn't you love to see one of these NFL owners, when somebody disrespects our flag, to say, get that son of a off the field right now, out, he's fired.
Tonight, I'm taking a knee for America.
President Trump's disapproval only seems to galvanise support for the protest, with public figures such as Stevie Wonder joining in. Meanwhile, questions are being asked about whether the walkout was planned in advance and the cost of using Air Force 2 to fly to and from the game, which some estimate could have cost up to $200,000.
Andrew Plant with that report. 27 minutes past 6. A Syrian refugee says his heart is full of joy after a working bee set up to help restore his trashed market garden turned into a full-on community party in Lower Hutt on Saturday. Last week, Khalid Al-Juja came to find his garden vandalised and only a fraction of the 2,000 plants he'd grown salvageable. But the Waifetu community in the hut rallied together, offering their time, plant cuttings, potting mix, money, kindness, presents, all of the good stuff. Emma Hatton has more.
Khalid Al-Juja fled war-torn Syria with his wife and 3 children 5 years ago. The family finally made it to New Zealand last year and settled in the Hutt Valley, where Mr Al-Juja established a market garden in the backyard of his home. Common Unity Project, a local sustainable living charity, joined forces with him 8 months ago to help deliver fruit and vegetables to needy families. Its project coordinator, Julia Milne, says with only 3 days' notice, some 500 people turned up to help, exceeding their expectations.
But amazing what you can do, and it kind of shows us the depth and breadth of our network, I think, where we just simply call out and say, well, who would like to help us with this one? And before you know it, everyone's just there, just community in action, total community in action.
Wellington musician Nigel Parry says he was inspired to offer up his time and play music at the event.
The day was absolutely fantastic. It was such a soulful and uplifting thing to be involved with. So I played some music, and a lot of other musicians came and supported by doing that as well. And then I got the gardening gloves on and started putting plants along with literally hundreds of other people.
Some 12,500 has been raised, with donations still trickling in. Khalid Al-Jouja says the support has been overwhelming. His friend Dalal Al-Sheeb translated his message of thanks.
He's happy now because lots of people stand beside him. They just want to help him. That's let him feel that lots of people care about him. When you see a lot of people trying to help you, it's like a fantastic feeling.
The Common Unity's Urban Kai project feeds hundreds of people in the Hutt Valley community. Julia Milne says she hopes the publicity will encourage people to continue supporting the project.
Our reach is quite big now. We have fruit trees across 12 different locations. We'd love food to be within walking distance of every family here in the Hutt Valley. But the thing that's really important to us is that the community holds as much of that and takes responsibility for feeding itself.
Ms Milne says some of the money raised may be used to try and find a more secure site for the garden and avoid the senseless destruction that took place nearly a week ago. For Checkpoint, Emma Hatton.
And on that story of community spirit, we end Checkpoint for tonight. Thank you so much for being with us. We'll be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The police admit that efforts of its frontline officers have been undermined by an offensive car crash tweet they were forced to take down. A South African psychiatrist who poisoned his wife in Dunedin has been quickly deported after serving his 16-year murder sentence. The number of Tongan and Samoan overstayers has halved to just over 10,000. Winston Peters has been in back-to-back coalition meetings since this morning, and a woman who had a baby after a failed sterilisation has lost a bid for weekly ACC compensation. Our next news and weather is at 7. If you think RNZ has breached formal standards either on air or in our online content, you have the right to make a formal complaint. This must be made in writing to the broadcast